Are you?
Oh, good thing you reminded me, or I. All right, yes, okay. All right, after this evening, we have only 2 more meetings of this class before summer break and 3 meetings of the Mysticism class. And this week and the next time we meet, we're going to finish the profile index. And the last week we will do some cross-profiling, which is always a lot of fun. And then over summer, I'm going to invite you to make formalized statements of everything that we've done in this past year. And I'm sure that everybody's going to want to do that. They'll all be charged up, and I couldn't restrain them if I wanted to. But if you're going to do a lot, you're going to, with someone, you're going to work with them for a long time. You want to build a dossier, and that's basically what we're going to do during the course of this class. And what I've decided to do is the class previous to this used 16 horoscopes, and it took 10 years to get through an intermediate class. And we produced a thick book. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to give everybody a thick book because it's got all the examples and I don't have to pass out any sheets or anything like that. And then if you want to work on things, you can see how it works, you know, at least how I work with it and see how it works in different charts. And I think that's the good way to go with it. But if you work with people and try to help them, everybody that does that kind of work creates a file and gets as much information as they can. Now, I suppose most of you will not do this, but I have to tell you that I enjoy it because I like putting together everything of what I have learned and what I've come across before I forget them. And putting it all together, you know, is a fine thing, because what happens is I find that just in the organization of the material, I get new insights and things that I could have, you know, that you've heard that from me often when I do reviews. The review doesn't sound like the original because I've learned a lot since then, and it isn't the same. I also like doing it because I like closure with things. I like to have something that I can come back to and reference. But in any case, even though I recommend it very highly, it's not something mandatory. It's something that will give you a model, and because someday somebody's going to hand you a horoscope and they're going to say, will you help me with this? And if you don't have some kind of reference that you can go to, you got to read those terrible ditty books, and those terrible ditty books, you don't learn any astrology and you can't really help anybody with them. All right. In fact, I even considered at one time all the people, like Ela probably has been in every class I've ever offered except when she was living in Texas or Germany or something like that. I've often thought of sitting down with each student and going through this whole procedure that we're going through now one-on-one, assuming that, you know, students have shown that they are sincere about wanting to know about themselves and come to an understanding of themselves astrologically. I thought about it, but it's way, way, way too much work. It's way too big. And maybe it might even interfere with people's self-reliance, which is my cop-out when I'm not helping other people. And it would be better if we were all younger, because then you could see what you could, you know, what prospects there were for you, what potential there was for you. But we don't have that now. We're old. We have history, and you can gain a lot from personal history. And that's helpful, especially if you're going to go through the grand retrospection fairly soon. But it's not the same thing. All right. This evening we're looking at, beginning to look at the action profiles, tests and profiles, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. We're only going to get through 11, 12, and 13, but that's because when I do the notes, I get into all sorts of side trips and things like that. And I figure, well, at my age, I'm allowed to do something like that. The activity tests and profiles are about how we do things. They are about action. And the way we take action is what is indicated by the aspects. So obviously all of the activity profiles are going to be aspect profiles. And we're not going to be really exhaustive. There's more of that into intermediary class, and you'll have at least the book for that. There's actually 105 recordings for that. I can't believe there was that much. So, but at least you'll get something of an idea what we're about. Now, in everyday language, when we do something, we normally use tools. And the astrological aspects can be seen as tools, like a pliers or a chisel or an awl relate to astrological aspects. The pliers relates to the opposition, and the chisel relates to the trine, and the conjunction relates to an awl or a punch or something like that. When you put the awl, poke a hole through, it's all and nothing. Nobody's listening. I'm cracking terrible puns and nobody's listening.
Yeah, usually you can't resist laughing yourself, and that gives you the ways.
Yeah.
When you're deadpan, we're puzzled.
Yeah. All right. When we look into the heavens, whether we're looking with our physical eyes or we're looking clairvoyantly, we don't see tools like that with the astrological forces. Instead, we see geometric relationships. And everything in astrology is based on angular relationships or the effects of angular relationships. Some of the things in astrology are like angles of incidence. For example, when the sun gets at a certain angle in spring, the sun rises up. It gets at that same angle in autumn, and the sap goes down. So we can see that that's an example of angular relationship. And this is related sort of like the way the houses work. If you have a planet in the first house, the effect will be different than in that same planet on the same day in the seventh house. It's that the position is I'm about to sneeze. I hope not. I don't know. But the angular relationship will change it. And the same planet with a background of stars behind it or a sign behind it will have a different angular relationships. Now, the signs themselves, each of them has a different angle of incidence. Now, the angular relationships that are associated with aspects work differently. They work resonantly rather than directly. And by that I mean that there are certain geometric relationships between heavenly bodies that set up resonances. Actually, every body has a resonant effect with every other body in space. But some of the resonances are more important because of the volume that can come out from the being in space or because of different angular relationships. And the more astrologically speaking, the more dominant resonances are those that are associated with the conjunction, the opposition, the square, the trine, and the sextile. Now this may sound like pie in the sky, that there are resonances between planets at certain angles with each other, but there are even physical things that come from this. And the first incident that I know of it is from the mid-1960s. There was a man that worked for RCA Communications, and I believe his name was John A. Nelson. And he wrote a paper and published the fact that when major planets are 90 and 180 degrees from each other, radio reception is poorer. And when they are 60 and 120 degrees from each other, radio reception is better. So the same things that they find to be more positively effective are the same things that astrologers find, but it's just remarkable, you know, that somebody was willing to publish that kind of paper. I don't know what planets were involved and what orbs that were used, but they reported that, and his findings have been corroborated. Now, scientists do not believe that this proves that astrology works. I don't believe that it proves that astrology works. I do believe that it shows that there are resonant effects in the, we'd call it the ethers, they'd call it the free electrons or something like that. So there is indeed a resonant influence. And if you have sufficiently sensitive instruments, like a very fine-tunable radio, you can find them. Humans can be at least as sensitive as any instrument we have, but we often do not respond because we're not listening for them or feeling them. After many, many years in working with deep prayer, I can finally distinguish the difference in the atmosphere when the sun is in one sign versus another sign. It's hard to do that. All right. The actual why astrology works, I don't think that'll be found until people have clairvoyance and they can penetrate deeper into the spiritual worlds. All right, we're speaking about spiritual astrology, and we're speaking about
ice.
streets were slippery.
Couldn't get into my car.
Oh, the ice.
Were
Yeah,
really kicked hard.
yeah.
Spent half an hour.
So we're talking about spiritual astrology, and we're speaking about how spiritual beings function in consciousness. It's all about consciousness. It seems to be about frequencies or pitch, and the best word probably that is more inclusive is tone. If the frequencies in consciousness are of such a range, it is a tone of color. If it's a higher frequency or a lower frequency, it is a pitch, or the lower is a sound. Now, this is really very simple stuff, but because there are actually ranges of vibration that have harmonics within them and things like that, and it gets very, very complicated. Now the tones, be they color tones or auditory tones, have relations with each other. Some of the relations are harmonious, though some of them seem dissonant or even discordant. So the harmonies of tones are analogous to the kinds of tones that we have here in the physical world. Some colors, you put them next to each other and they're agreeable and they are pleasant to look at. But you take other colors and it's jarring to look at them. I sometimes find combinations of blue and green very unpleasant if they're laid right next to each other. Now, when we're saying these things, we're talking about all kinds of subjective personal values, at least partially. There are some relationships that are true, like harmonics in harmonies, in chords, in music, are true, and nature responds to them. In a higher spiritual reality, if we're talking about things like the planets, if we're talking about a celestial music or something like that, everything is harmonious. And if somebody's a composer, a really good composer, they can make a dissonance that is terrible to your ears be exquisitely beautiful by relating it to other combinations of tones. Like I especially think that is true with Sergei Prokofiev. He has handled dissonance, I think, better in a pleasing way than many other composers. Okay, so we're talking about setting up vibrations or reverberations or reverberations, and they are emanating from various bodies, which are the bodies of great spiritual beings as they're moving through space. And these waves, so to speak, meet in various combinations, and it's part of a celestial kaleidoscope that is always changing, always changing. And when they mix, they produce various harmonies. Again, this is stating it all simple, maybe too simple. The waves are of varying intensities, and they are of various qualities depending on the background or the source or all sorts of other things. Now these interactions, these harmonics or these resonances is probably the best word. These resonances between planets are not something that are sudden. They come on and they culminate in intensity and then they pass off. And this is something that I think probably every one of us has experienced. Suppose you're taking a long distance trip across country and you turn on the radio. This is especially true with the FM band. And if you're fortunate, you can find a good music source, which means it isn't country music. I've actually had it happen going somewhere like through Oklahoma or someplace like that, where every station I went to was a country music station, and two different stations were playing the same song. But at any rate, you pick up a station, and if you get closer to the source, the signal becomes louder and it becomes clearer. And there is the optimal or the height, which is sort of like culmination in astrology. That is as good a signal as you're going to get. And then as you keep on going, it diminishes and it fades. And sometimes when you're at the end of the range, transmission range from a station, sometimes it's there and sometimes it isn't there. Like there's a jazz station from Milwaukee that I like to listen to, and you have to get almost to Lake Mills before you can pick it up. But sometimes you're on the edge and once it's there and then it's not there. Now, this is a good analogy, except with us and with what is taking place in the heavens. It's like having 10 different or half a dozen different radios on different stations at the same time. Some are increasing, so So it's that kind of a picture. We human beings are more than our dense physical bodies. We are spiritual beings. And we ourselves are foci of astrological expression. At present, we are more receivers than we are transmitters. But we can be transmitters. But even in our reception, we're unconscious because most people are not aware of the actual astrological influences, even though they respond unconsciously. Now, when we do respond to astrological expressions, it's not the same for each person. Some people are more responsive, other people are more dull. Some people are more creative in their responses, and each of us has a different instrument which has different qualities in what it can experience and respond to experience. A lot of this depends on our evolutionary status, and that is something that's not shown in a horoscope. The evolutionary status of an individual can only be told by intuition. And even when it is told by intuition, you have to check it out with observation. Science is very good about that. Now, some of the difference in response is due to the fact that we are unique in character. We are differentiated in different ways. Each of us has very different horoscopes. And each of us has very different things that we have to do in life. And what we have, what paints we have to paint the world with. So the horoscope, in the most simple way, is a map of the heavens at a time and place of birth. And it's an indication of what all those reverberant patterns are. And when an infant is born, the infant is subject to that. And we all know that little children are all eyes and all ears, and they pick up things that adults are much too dull to pick up. But when you follow that back closer and closer to the moment of birth, the sensitivity goes up asymptotically so that it's almost infinite sensitivity at the moment of birth, and there is a virgin receptiveness. And so what happens is that pattern gets stamped on the etheric or all of the bodies of the individual, and it stays with him for life. Now, it isn't because of what happened at birth that we have the life that we have. It is because what we are, we chose to jump back into the game at that time and work out what we are in harmony with the cosmos. So we aren't what we are because of our horoscope, but our horoscope is what it is because of what we are. Big, important distinction. So when we're working with a horoscope, we're trying to read the cosmic mind, and we're trying to read the mind of the individual, and we're trying to weigh and understand the intent of that divine being that lives in that body.
Cause and effect.
What?
Cause and effect.
Yeah. It designed this life. So when we're doing these activity tests, we're trying to determine how the most relevant astrological sources were interacting with each other at the time of birth. So when we do these activity tests, we see how the gods are interacting with each other. From this, we can understand what kind of actions the native needs to take in order to fulfill its purpose in life. We all come with a purpose because that's part of our spiritual being. We all have life spirit, and the best word for describing life spirit is infinite purpose. And so we all have that purpose, and when we're working with astrology, we're hoping to discover what that purpose is and help the person to find it for themselves, or to help us find it for ourselves within our own horoscopes. So, in doing this, it's very important to remember that the actions that we take or that we don't take are not just physical. They are actions and interactions in consciousness. And we have different levels and different degrees, different varieties of consciousness. And so what we're going to look at as we do these tests is we're going to look at consciousness. All right, now we're ready to do the activity tests. I sometimes have to get these kind of things out of my craw before I can actually say something or do even simple things. Like all of the other tests that we've done, the activity tests are very simple. But that doesn't mean that they can't be made even more simple. So what I have done is I've done your work for you again. If you use this version of the horoscope that you have, all of the information except the phase is available in these tables. And so what I did is I took them out of the tables and I made these lists, aspect lists for the horoscopes of Freud and Jung. The phase test is something that we'll come to later. The first test and profile are the activity test and profile. And it's very simple. You just count the number of aspects in the horoscopes. That's it. Now, different astrologers use different orbs to deem whether an aspect is present or not. It gets to be like religion. Do you cross yourself with 2 fingers or with 3? It's that kind of a thing. If you use small orbs, everything that you note relating to that aspect will be pretty obvious. But you might miss things if your orbs are too small. And on the other hand, if the orbs are large, you're not going to miss anything, but some of the things that you think are there may not be there at all. So as life goes on, I find myself much more inclined to using smaller orbs. Now for these, we're using, at the bottom of that chart, there is a picture of something coming to high intensity and then backing off, and applying versus separating. And the orbs that we are using are 6.5 degrees before culmination to 6 degrees after culmination. And that's pretty middle of the road. It's not extreme in either being tight or loose. Now, some people do add a degree or 2 between the sun and the moon, but I do not, because it just gets to be too complicated, and then that opens the door to open any aspect of the sun or moon. In fact, if you look at if you look at the moon, if you're looking at the Carl Jung chart, and you're looking at the moon conjoined Pluto, That's over 7 degrees. That's no aspect. If you look on that chart, that's crazy. All right.
Well, it's 2 degrees.
No, it's not the 33 and 31, it's the large.
Oh, right.
Yeah. All right. Now, this activity profile is quality neutral. It is not better to have more tools or to have less tools. There are advantages or disadvantages to either. Recently, Jerry and I worked on a craft project, and Jerry had a remarkable number of tools, and his tools even included materials. And we came up with an excellent product because things that I never would have known about because I hadn't worked with that many kinds of tools or substances, we sidestepped those sort of things. So it was helpful to have all of those tools. On the other hand, I used to play golf every day when I was in high school in golf season, basically because the kids that were on the golf team could play golf for free. And so I played every day. I was terrible at it, but I got to go out there, and it was very, very funny. I was a terrible golfer. Because of my bad posture, my swing wasn't right, and I had a terrible slice. And anybody could go out for the golf team, and they wouldn't cut you. So you got to play free golf. And one day, just as a quirk, at the first hole, I was about 35 feet away from the green, and I chipped it in, and it just happened to be where the advisor to the high school golf team was there. So he let me go to one to one golf tournament. It was between Mayville and Waupun is what it was. And at the tee, you were supposed to, the tee was for this hole over here. But over there you could see another green. And I line up to tee off, and the guy says, "You're not going to that green, you're going to that one over there." I said, "Yeah, I know." I played my slice and it went on. But I played enough golf to know that some people have too many clubs in their bag. They can't keep them all in practice. And they don't know which one always to use all the time. And that's an example of having too many tools. So when we do this test, looking at the sheet, Sigmund Freud, we count how many aspects there are. And we get a profile of 10. And that's what we enter into the activity profile. It's an activity of 10. Now, usually between 10 and 15 is a normal or average number of aspects. If it's 10 or below 10, it's low activity. And if it is above 15, it's high activity. So that would mean that this profile is medium to low, somewhere in there. And what I wrote in the conspectus line is not a seeker of versatility in action. He didn't make it a practice to be versatile and use different methods. All right. The question then comes out, is this profile true to his life? And the answer is clearly yes, because he was not active in a high number of diverse activities. And one of those was writing. He is an excellent writer. He won the Goethe Prize, which is the highest prize you can get for literature in the German language. He was that quality of a writer. He wrote mostly essays, and then the essays got compiled together into books. Now, I've read most of the major works of his. I'm on the work, right now reading his last major work, which is fascinating and stupid at the same time. But when I do that, I find that each time in each essay or each collection of essays into a book, he uses the same formula. He starts out with this and this and this, and then develops this, and then, you know, after you've read a few of his essays, you know exactly what each one is going to be like. So this is not a high versatility person. All right, when we look at Carl Jung and count there, we end up with an even lower number of aspects. We end up with 9. Now that's clearly a low profile. And my conspectus on that one reads almost fixated and routine. Now that's not to say that he's necessarily habit bound and that he doesn't know any diversity, but it probably is with him by intention. He intended to keep things simple. He intended, you know, to work on only certain things. Now,
Question.
yes, sir.
When it's written down as applying double
Yep.
and applying double and so on, does that not count as 2 aspects?
No,
It
no,
does not.
no, no. We're actually going to go into that one next week or the next time we meet. That it just means that one is going forward and one is going backwards, and they're both contributing to the culmination of an aspect, or they're both separating. I don't think we have any separating doubles. There are not a lot of retrograde planets in these charts. Now, if you're dealing with depth psychology, things get awfully complicated awfully quickly, because that's the nature of neurotics. The nature of neurotics, then they beat around the bush with a lot of things because they don't want to confront stuff. And so it was a valuable asset to Carl Jung to keep things as simple as possible, to keep it at in such a way that he wasn't going to be led off by this or that or that. He does have some things that could be called idée fixes. Like we've mentioned it before, the number 4 is he becomes fixated on that. All right, so both of these turn out to be accurate. All right, the next test is number 12, and that is the intensity test. And this is a test of how relatively significant planets are, that the aspects are. Now, in this little scale on the bottom, it shows the boundaries for low intensity at either end, and then it goes to medium intensity in either end, and in the central part is high intensity. So it is 6.5 to 4.5 applying, or 4 to 6 separating is low intensity. 4.5 to 2.5 applying, and 2 to 4 separating is medium, and everything from 2.5 applying to 2 separating is high intensity. Now, this isn't a matter of religion, like you're going to be damned if something is 1 minute off, and this is just, all of these things are rough rules of thumb. Now, when we apply this test to the horoscope of Sigmund Freud, we get 4 high, 3 medium, and 3 low. Now, my conspectus reads, skills at varying states of development, phasing in and phasing out. And that's what this is, assuming past lives, that we don't suddenly out of the blue develop a skill or a bad habit or something like that. Sometimes it builds over a number of lives. And so what we're saying is that sometimes things are building up, and some things we're letting go of, and they're passing out of interest. And so that's the way it works in life, or over a number of lives. Now, some things never develop to be of high importance. They become developed as far as they're going to go, and then they fade back, or they're incorporated into our being and our second nature to us, and they're part of our residual consciousness rather than being an active tool. All right, so the 4-3-3 with Sigmund Freud, does that mean balance in character? Now, if we look up the sheet, if we look at number 3, the attitude, the attribute attitude test, there a perfect balance is 4-3-3. Or if we look at test number 9, the angularity opportunity test, there the perfect balance is 4-3-3. But those are locations or populations in different kinds of things. But 4-3-3 doesn't necessarily mean balance. It just means that somebody, with regard to actions in general and the means of doing things in general, has things at various stages of perfection and various stages of application. So it's a kind of a balance, but it's not the balance in the same way the other tests are. Again, we have to ask ourselves, is this true to character? And this is, as far as I know, I've read a lot. I've read 4 volumes of autobiography on him, and it's clear that he had some abilities that were very astute. His scientific sense was very astute, but other things, he had no interest in music or anything like that. And he has some abilities that are very sharp, and some of them that are not so well. Some things he only carried so far and then dropped them off. Like for a while he played chess. And as he got a little older, the chess was too intense or nervous for him. He didn't want to do that. All right, now we look at Carl Jung, and where I start to go off on all kinds of side trips. When we look at Carl Jung test, we get 7 high intensity, 2 medium intensity that are just barely medium intensity. You could almost say that this was a 9-0, but not quite. And 0 low intensity. And in my conspectus, I say, he does nothing lightly. Now, I've been doing astrology now for 50-some years, and this is a very remarkable profile. I don't think I've ever seen anyone before that had a profile like this. But before doing even any minimal discussion of it, I'd like to address 2 mathematical problems. And one of them has 2 parts. And it involves a lot of mathematical calculation, which I've wanted to do for years, but I have never done because the calculations are pretty complicated and would involve a lot of time. And I've never felt the desire to do that, even when I did have a little time here and there. And it's very unlikely that some other astrologer is going to do them, because astrologers do stupid things, and they don't they don't do things that are important. I'll try to state the first problem, mathematical problem. by stating two assumptions which seem to be true, but I'm not sure that they are. Would have to be proven or disproven mathematically. The one thing that seems to be true is that if there are few aspects, chances are that they most likely have to be above average intensity. And if there are many aspects, the chances are that they most likely have to be below average intensity. Because now, these are not just simple questions of probability. They're a kind of probability based on the permutations of geometry using 10 bodies and a 360-degree circle with a bias for Sun, Venus, and Mercury because they never get very far from each other. So it's by looking at a lot of horoscopes, these propositions seem to be true. However, when I sit down with a pencil and paper, I can rig horoscopes that seem to defy both of these assumptions. And it's fairly easy to, especially to the second one, to disprove this, rig it so that the second one is not true. If somebody would like to work that out, I would be very grateful. It would have to involve 10 bodies, 5 basic aspects, 6-degree orbs, and I would prefer, if you work it out, that you do it in fractions rather than decimal probabilities, which I don't like at all. All right. Now, both of these assumptions utilize something that refers to the second mathematical problem in astrology, and that is average aspect intensity. Now, there are two kinds of average aspect intensity: global and local. Global is simply the average intensity of all possible aspects. And within our orb range, since our orb range is 12.5 degrees, you would expect that the average would be somewhere just a little over 3. So that's the global. That one you can keep in your mind because that'll always be true. But it is when we get to the local that things are difficult, or that things become significant. It's really simple to calculate. You just take all of the orbs of all of the aspects and add them up and divide by the number of aspects, and that gives you the mean intensity. Very easy to do. I did it, and let's see what we come up with here. I guess I should talk about this a little more first. The idea is you should be able to form an index of average intensity. And if that index is above the global intensity, then you have somebody who is very keenly focused in activity. And if it is lower, it's somebody that, sort of talented, or sort of have talents that work. Now, if we take the local mean aspect for Sigmund Freud, it comes out to be 3 degrees and 15 minutes. And that is pretty close to what the global mean intensity would be. So this index looks like it's worthwhile. So in this verifies, in a way, our conclusions that we took when we did that test. Now, when you do the local mean for the Carl Jung, the result is very high intensity. It's 1 degree and 34 minutes. There are a lot of horoscopes that don't have a single aspect of that high of intensity. And here, this is the average for all of the aspects. So that makes this a very remarkable horoscope. What can we say about it? We can say this is not somebody like Freud who has things at various stages of development. It's somebody with all well-developed tools, sharp, clear, distinct talents. This is sort of a high point or an epitome in terms of a string of past lives. To me, this says that this rebirth was planned for a long time, and the tools were developed to be all at their height to carry out what was to be carried out in this life. So this, you might say, because of this profile, this is somebody who has a life of mission. You know, he's a mission man to accomplish. Now, the high-intensity aspects often indicate specialization. And in mechanics, there are many, many specialized tools that work for one thing and one thing only. Now, that often happens with high-intensity aspects because in the development of them, there was little leeway for developing anything else. So this results in a very significant result. And when we get to cross profiling, this is going to turn out to be very important. All right, we're ready to look at number 13. And I did some more work for you. And these are keywords for everything that we're looking at in all of these things. We're going to use them tonight and the next time.
Getting back to Jung for just a moment.
Yes.
Would that global intensity, would that be an indication of someone being a specialist or
Yeah.
specializing?
Yep. Yep. In fact, all of his tools were to one end, you might say. All right, the number 13, it's a broad and general profile like all of the others. And in order to understand all of the activity of individual, you have to blend all of these factors together. And we have to remember when we're doing these, we're only looking at the high points of character. And we're looking at them as if we're seeing them from a distance. Now, the subject for test number 13 is always difficult to deal with. And the reason is that so many people see the world in terms of good and bad, or good and evil, or constructive or destructive. And that's the way the world sees things. It's too much polarized. And very few people see things in terms of better or worse. And even fewer people see things in terms of becoming good, being better, and being still better. There is that relative kind of thing. As soon as you get into somebody that has the polarity consciousness, all relativity and all, you're stuck. You can't progress anywhere because it's back and forth between good and evil. Lao Tzu got stuck in that. He said, once you make a good man, you automatically make an evil man. And I say, no, that's not true. Once you have a good man, you have the possibility of a better man. And it's not understanding things in terms of evolution. Now we've had the knowledge of evolution that should permeate our moral and judgmental consciousness, but it doesn't. So progress and improvement and moral evolution are realities. And the sooner we see that, the sooner our progress will accelerate. and the easier it'll be to live with and work with other people. It's absurd to think of astrology in terms of good and evil, because the forces that come from the heavens are not evil. If anything is evil, it is our response to the heavens, and that's something we can change. You shouldn't study astrology if you don't think you can change. All right, with this in mind, let's quickly do the profile. We're almost done here. It's going to turn out to be almost exactly an hour. In the Freud horoscope, we end up with 5 benefic, 4 malefic, and 1 variable. But when we look at that 1 variable, it is the conjunction of the Sun and Uranus. But Sun and Uranus only form benefic aspects. Both of them are sextile to Neptune. Therefore, the conjunction, since it's associated in an aspect pattern that is all benefics and 1 variable, that variable has to be considered a benefic. So what you end up with is a 6-4 profile. And from that, we can, what did I say here? My conspectus reads more benefic or positive actions than malefic or negative, but it's pretty close to balanced. So, what we're seeing here is that his virtues outweigh his problematic tendencies. The fact that he loved and cared for people outweighed the fact that he smoked 20 cigars a day. Can you imagine his wife having to kiss him every day after he had smoked 20 cigars and she didn't smoke at all? The whole house must have reeked the cigar smoke. He tried to quit several times, and even when he had cancer and he had machines to open his jaw and things like that, he was still smoking as many as 5 cigars a day. We won't say anything that he loved to eat chocolate and let this chocolate. No, chocolate's not bad. All right. So we see here then that his life is more likely, he's more likely to accomplish. His talents outweigh his flaws or his errors that he makes, and he is more likely to have a preponderance of regenerative activities over unregenerative activities. That's pretty clear. And we look at the Jung, we end up with a 5-3-1, 5 benefic, 3 malefic, and 1 variable, and we have exactly the same thing there. Venus conjoined Mercury only forms sextiles. They form the sextiles to the moon. I thought it was to Saturn, but all right, to the moon. So this makes it a 6-3 profile. So that means 2 benefics to 1 to each malefic, and it's decidedly likely to success in all endeavors. To use the no-no word, his intent is definitely to the good. Freud's was also. But he encountered more obstacles to do so. You have to look at this. If you had something like, if Jung had all 9-0, that wouldn't necessarily make for the best kind of life, because the best kind of life is when the positives and negatives struggle with each other and there is growth through that struggle. And that's very valuable. All right. If we cross profile number 12 and number 13, we end up with some really strong standout virtues between the two of them, but that's a preview of coming attractions. Now, next time we're going to finish the whole profile index, and since the phase and application are at question, here is something so that you can understand application and phase. And that's about all I have for this evening. Martha, if you want to sit down with your horoscope sometime and just go through all of these, and I can help you to see what they are, and then you can start applying them yourself if you want to do that. Okay.
So